On today's show, I am joined by Ricky O'Donnell of SB Nation for part one of a two-part conversation about the NBA draft. And before we get to Ricky, the latest intel from the ESPN mock draft and what's kind of been out there in the ether about the Hawks and the number one pick. And all of that is coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1742 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday. In fact, it is Juneteenth and 1 week until the NBA draft. Today's podcast sponsored by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And the place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started right now. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please go ahead and subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, as well as on YouTube on the video side. And again, we are 7 days away from the NBA draft. A lot is going on. I am recording this first segment late morning on Wednesday. It is actually part one of two. I have Ricky O'Donnell of SB Nation coming on in a second to talk about all things NBA draft. And we did discuss a lot of things, actually recorded this late night on Tuesday, the rest of this podcast. But I was already going to do an intro of some kind before I brought Ricky in. And then Jonathan Givony and Jeremy Woo of ESPN released a new mock draft that was full of some intel on Wednesday morning. And naturally, as usually happens, I got lots of questions from Hawks fans when that came out. So we're going to start with that and do the first segment on that alone. And then again, Ricky will be coming in for part one of two in a moment. But a lot to get to here. Again, this is ESPN. It's actually ESPN Plus. So it's behind the paywall. I will try not to give it all away for that standpoint. But early in the piece that was released on Wednesday morning, the combination of Givony and Woo wrote that the Hawks, quote, seem to be honing in on either Zachary Risacher or Donovan Clingan, end quote. Now, that caused a bit of a stir, as you might imagine, because Alex Sarr's name is not in that sentence. It could be an elaborate smokescreen, but I have heard rumblings in the last couple of days that at least some people do not expect Sarr to be the pick at number one. Now, again, some people. I have not heard definitively or anything like that or anything close to that Sarr won't be the pick at number one overall. And my guard is always up this time of year. Silly season, targeted leaks, etc. But with what I had already heard, and then Givony and Woo writing this, I took some note. And I do think that the perception that Alex Sarr is like the leader in the clubhouse for the Hawks, that I know some fans have, is not necessarily what's been out there in the actual intel cycles in recent days. From there, they mocked Risacher at number one, which is not surprising because Givony's had Risacher at number one on his own board for quite some time. He did acknowledge that the consensus is the Hawks have not made a final decision just yet. And by the way, as a good time to plug this now, I talked to Sam Vecini on the show on Monday of The Athletic. Sam is fantastic. We talked about all things draft, but he was echoing that. There's still a lot of uncertainty there. Then Landry Fields talked to the media on Monday afternoon, and I did a show about that on Tuesday. Same sentiment. It's still very much wide open at this point in time. But Givony did write that, quote, many teams say their intel indicates Risacher is the favorite at number one, end quote. Now, that's many teams. That's not the Hawks. Note the wording there. I don't always want to parse this stuff word for word, but this is kind of the same thing as like the old rival executives say thing. That means that it's not from the Hawks. That means it's from other teams. Keep that in mind. That means less to me. Risacher is going to work out today as I'm recording this on Wednesday in Atlanta. That will be his first workout for any team so far. Of course, he played deep into the summer, actually, with his team overseas, and he was at the overseas camp, and he's now come to America, but he's not talking with any other team. No surprise there. This actually came up yesterday on the show as well, and some of the buzz about Sarr not working out for the Hawks, and Givony reported that also. That does not mean that Sarr will not work out for the Hawks, or that the Hawks couldn't just take him anyway without a workout, but I've heard this and now kind of been more confirmed by Givony that he has not worked out so far for Atlanta, and that is a data point kind of no matter where you want to spin that. Givony also said on TV on Tuesday, and again in this mock, that Donovan Clingan was fantastic in his workout with the Hawks. That's been out there for a while. I've heard the same. He is one of those guys, one of the things that I've probably said this 3 times now, but that I'm quite sure about is that the Hawks like Donovan Clingan. Now, again, how much they like him, what that actually means, more up for debate, but I do believe from what I have heard and what I've been told that the Hawks like Clingan. I think he did well in the workout from all of what I have heard. The last thing that I will touch on here before I bring in Ricky and kind of talk about more of the stuff, of course, is the trade down aspect of all of this. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you will have heard me and various guests say that it's definitely on the radar. I think more pointedly with Sam Vecini on the show Monday, we talked a lot about trade down scenarios, and Hawks fans don't always love that, and I totally get it, but I'm trying to be practical and realistic that trade down scenarios are on the table. That doesn't mean that they're definitely going to trade down, but certainly it should not surprise anyone if the Hawks trade down. So it's not really new information, but Gavoni did float the idea that the Hawks could trade down from 1 to 4 with San Antonio and get a pick of their own back potentially as the sweetener to go ahead and do that. Ironically, I talked to Ricky last night, Tuesday night, on this show, and we recorded that before the mock came out, and we talked about that later on in the podcast. So when you hear that, just know that I talked about that even before it was reported. I do think that the Hawks, again, think not know, but think that Klingon is the guy that the Hawks would like to get in a trade down scenario, from what I can glean. But you can't realistically have a trade down scenario and only have one option that you want. You have to be prepared for the realities or the potentials that someone like Memphis or Portland or whoever trades up ahead of you and takes Klingon from under your nose. So with that in mind, Gavoni reported they worked out Reed Shepherd of Kentucky through a trade down lens, and he kind of emphasized it was not necessarily for number 1 overall, but more of a trade down. I actually heard that through the grapevine in the last few days, but he actually also added that they've worked out Manas Buzelis, Ron Holland, and Cody Williams. Now, Williams is the guy that I have the lowest personally among that group, and I would not be super interested in him in the top 5, 6, 7 picks, but he certainly is a lottery talent. So those guys will all be in the trade down range. Landry Fields was, of course, coy about how many guys they have worked out or at least considered at the top of the draft. He wouldn't release that information. But if you're scoring at home, just with what Gavoni has reported, they will already worked out Risache today and Klingon. That's 2. Reed Shepherd is 3. Manas Buzelis is 4. Ron Holland is 5. Cody Williams is 6. And that's before you get to anyone that has not been reported, which definitely happens sometimes. So that's a wide net. That's something that Landry's been talking about for a while. I've seen some confusion and some questions about why they're working out this many players. What I would say is there's no reason not to bring in as many lottery level guys as possible. There is no downside to seeing more players, especially if, and I believe this is true, trading down is at least an option that's on the board. Last year, if they had the number 1 pick, you could have probably stopped with one workout, and it would have been Wemby, and that would have been it. There was no real reason to kind of work out more guys. This year, number 1, there's no consistent number 1. And also, if you were to move down, you have to be able to draft 6, 7, 8 guys because you could, at least evaluate that many guys. So if it was me and I was planning or at least thinking about trading down, I'd work out all of these guys plus Steph Castle. Obviously, you want to get Alex Sarr in the mix, but I would have a wide net as well. Even guys like, Dalton Connect. Like, I would not say that I'm going to draft those guys, but you got to be ready. And I think the Hawks probably are just kind of doing that at this point in time. So we'll have more on this. Obviously, there is still a week to go. I will at some point kind of in solo fashion touch on my final board and my final thoughts, probably the day or at least the morning of the draft. I do have some guests lined up that I won't spoil beyond Ricky. I'm hoping to have at least 2 more guests, maybe 3 more guests. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but we're doing lots and lots of episodes right now. I think we did 6 last week. This is going to be 4 this week already as of Wednesday. So I'm not shying away from it. There's a lot going on here. But for now, I would stress not to overreact to intel or assume that everything that is written, even by good, credible sources like Gavoni, who knows a lot of stuff, is going to happen. This is silly season. It's smokescreen season. And I would recommend parsing, kind of seeing the way things are written. I'll do some of that on the show as well, but not to just jump off a cliff and think every single thing that's reported is going to happen. It's notable for sure that Gavoni kind of flat out reported that they are, at least from what he is hearing, again, I'm going to quote it correctly, quote, seem to be honing in on either Risache or Klingon. That doesn't mean that it's definite, but that's notable for sure from a prominent source. And we'll get into all of that and more coming up later on in this week and into next week. Okay, before we get to Ricky, and again, this is part 1 of 2, so stay tuned for part 2 at the end of this conversation. Before that comes, though, and Ricky will be back after this break, but first, a word from our friends at eBay Motors. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion, drive, and patience are the formula of winning championships, and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and also level up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers you're looking for or roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, really anything you're looking for in the car and automobile space, whether you're into speed, power, or style. eBay Motors has you covered across the board. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you will always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Motors. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money's coming back to you, because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, of course, but you are not burning cash. With all the parts that you need, the price that you're looking for, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay guarantee feels available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. I'm joined now by Ricky O'Donnell of SB Nation fame. Ricky, how are you?
I'm good, Brad. Thanks for having me.
I think this is like your fourth or fifth time being on this show. Usually like once a year I can twist your arm enough. I realized this, I didn't even say this to you offline even, but I realized when I actually emailed you, and I did not know you were on your honeymoon when I did that, and I saw that later on either Twitter or something, and I was like, oh, not the best time to ask Ricky to do my draft podcast. Like, congratulations, by the way, on that. That's fun.
You know, man, it was the first time I ever left the country in my life, but 2 days before I was at the combine. So I had gotten all these great interviews. I'm flying my honeymoon being like, man, like, should I like try to write a Duran Holmes feature right now? Like, I got some good stuff from him, but no, always happy to join and talk draft with you, Brad. And, you know, this time, well, first of all, I have to admonish you because the Bulls, my favorite team, who suck and are horrible, they smoked the Hawks in the play-in.
They sure did. I actually had your I had your Bulls co-host Jason Pat on the show to preview that play-in game, and Jason and I were kind of in a battle to see who wanted to win the game less. I think at that point, at least that's what he wanted to make it into. But yeah, that was interesting. It's been a weird 2-month stretch between from that game to the lottery, winning the lottery, and then kind of pivoting to the Hawks are now in this position, and the Bulls are. We won't do much Bulls content, but the Bulls are the Bulls, Ricky. They just are the Bulls forever.
Yeah, I'd rather be the Hawks than the Bulls. That's for sure, especially with this number one pick. So you guys are sitting pretty.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. I've asked kind of this question to almost everyone I've had on to talk about the draft, and it kind of requires you to take your reporter hat on and put your analyst hat on. It's like ignore everything about what's been reported out there. And like I've been asking, like, how wide of a net would you be casting with the number one pick if you were the Hawks? Like, how many guys would be in the mix for you? And it's also a way to get into like what you think about the top of this class. I think obviously everyone I think by now knows that the consensus is the top is not anybody's favorite in this class. But do you agree with that? And also, like, where would you be looking if it was just like context free, just Ricky's analysis? Where would you be looking if you were at the top?
Yeah, it's, you know, I think this is the 11th draft I've covered. I do think this is the weakest one. And drafts, ultimately, like the way people view them is through the prism of, is there a player so obviously good at the top of the draft that not even the league's worst front office could screw it up? And Wembanyama last year was a premium example of that. Nobody would have taken anyone but Wembanyama. And we've seen a lot of those guys in recent years. Sometimes it's a two-player race like Chet and Paolo, but you know, there's usually a consensus number one pick. And for this class, there's not been a consensus number one pick at any point in the cycle when these guys were going through their high school careers up and through their pre-draft season. So it's a rough draft. But, you know, I go back to 2013 when Anthony Bennett went number one overall. And that draft had two Hall of Famers after the lottery in Giannis and Rudy Gobert. So I think even bad drafts have good players. And to say you don't want the number one pick, you'd have to be a coward. Of course you want the number one pick. Yeah, there's more pressure on you to get it right. And the chances of the Hawks actually picking the best player in this draft at number one seem like pretty small, right?
Agreed.
Like it would be, I don't know if it's like 10-1 or something, but like there's not great odds that the Hawks actually get the best player with the first pick. But I want the first pick. And I think getting the first pick is awesome. I wish my crappy basketball team had it instead of yours. And there is going to be pressure on management to come through with this. But, you know, go big or go home. You got to take the player you think can actually elevate the Hawks to a level of Eastern Conference contention. Because Trae Young's only 25 years old and is just now entering his prime. He's already got a conference finals run under his belt. The rest of the Hawks, yeah, they kind of suck, but you got some interesting pieces there. There's like a rough outline of arguably an interesting team. So I think, the Hawks could go a lot of different ways with this pick, and there's so many different avenues, as I'm sure you have discussed at length. The fact that they owe an unprotected pick in 25 and 27 to the Spurs is wild, and it really makes you think wow, should we just take Donovan Clingan because we think he could address our consistently crappy defense, which has been the case since they drafted Trae, and you don't want to give up Cooper Flagg. That'll make you look bad. So there's a pretty easy plug and play scenario there where Clingan can, I think I looked this up. The Hawks were 26th in blocks per game last year. They didn't have a lot of rim protection, obviously. Capella's level has slipped a bit. Okongwu, would love to see him get a chance. He's never really gotten a big chance. So someone like Clingan would just be like a plug and play guy. I would not take Clingan because I would be thinking, you got the first pick. You got to try to hit a home run. You don't want to hit a double. But a home run could have a longer path of development, therefore yielding more humiliating results in the present. So there's a lot of play. In terms of who would I look at for the number one pick? Nikola Topic has been my guy in this draft the entire cycle. I had him as the number one player since December. Well, he got hurt in January, and then he just didn't play again.
Yeah, he got hurt, and he's also not a great Hawks fit. If you have number one, it's kind of tough to draft an on ball guy
100%. Yeah, I wouldn't take him. I'm just saying he was my number one guy in this class. Now he has a torn ACL. I assume he's not going to play his rookie season. He would not be a good Hawks fit. He would not be on my Hawks board. Ron Holland would be on my Hawks board. And I'm about to drop a big Ron Holland story at SB Nation. I'm currently I think I just finished it. Or I need to write the last couple sentences. But
we'll stay tuned for that, everybody. Read that when it comes out.
Yeah. I'm going to need a day to edit it too. But I talked to his high school coach, David Peavy at Duncanville High School. You should get him on the podcast if you are doing this every day. Yeah, he's a real character. He was bringing the heat. He gave me some good quotes. And then I talked to his USA basketball coach, Sharman White, who coached Ron Holland to 2 gold medals with USA basketball. One of those alongside Cooper Flagg in the 2022 U17 World Cup. So got a story on him coming out. I would consider him. Clingan, I wouldn't consider him number one. And then, I really like Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham. I wouldn't consider them for the Hawks. So really, it would be Ron Holland versus Alex Sarr. And I would go Sarr is where I would land on that. With the knowledge that, this guy's probably not going to be very good next season. But I think long-term, he has the best physical tools. He would be the most interesting chess piece overall, and I think he's a great fit with Trae, where if you're drafting him, you need someone to set him up. He's not going to create his own shot, which is a weird thing about a number one overall pick. Most number one overall picks are shot creators, and if you draft Alex Sarr number one overall, he's not a shot creator. You need someone to set him up. Trae can do that, and then I'm thinking too, Trae got a little better defensively last year.
Yep.
Still going to be a liability. The team defense has been terrible every year he's been on the team. The Hawks defense last year, I believe, was 26. And you just want someone like Sarr behind him, I feel because he has incredible recovery tools. He could guard a bit on the perimeter, it seems and he's going to block shots. And he would just potentially give you a lot of coverage versatility that they don't really currently have. So I would probably take Sarr, and I would probably look at Holland and Sarr. Holland might slip out of the lottery, so this is just what I would do.
Yeah,
and the Hawks are an interesting team because even if they traded DeJounte, you still don't want Reed Shepherd and Trae next to each other. They'd just be too small. So, yeah. And you still don't want Toppich. So, yeah, I'd go Sarr or Holland, and I lean Sarr.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summertime it means baseball, basketball, and so much more. You can bet it all at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with FanDuel. That's $200 you can bet to use on everything from WNBA to who's going to hit the ball with the wall in Major League Baseball and so much more. But all of your favorite players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. The app at FanDuel Sportsbook is really easy to use. They have everything that you need in the sports betting space, from over-unders to money lines, game props, player props, future bets, and so much more. The FanDuel app is safe, it is secure, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. NBA, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, college baseball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And now is the best time. Sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. The place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So there's lots to get into there. I kind of want to go philosophical first, because you kind of alluded to like #1 overall pick, taking the swing versus maybe plugging a hole. Is not like the most elegant way to put that, but that's kind of what it would be in some ways. And not to spoil it, but I know you wrote a mock draft this week and it had Klingon #1. And I, based on what you just said, you're putting him there for intel reasons, not necessarily for analysis reasons. Is that fair to say, based on what you just said?
Well, yeah. So, like you're doing a Hawks podcast every day. I'm doing a mock draft every week. And last week was what I would do with every pick.
Right.
Just in case the NBA decides,
let's
just go with this middle-aged blogger this time. Let's just see what he says. So that was mine last week. And I had Alex Sarr as the pick last week.
Which is why I read that. And, there's this philosophical conversation that's happening. Look, a lot of it in Hawks land, not to go down the internet rabbit hole too much, but it's like there's a contingent that's like Sarr bust, and they won't hear any other explanation. And I get it. Like if you watch the right games or the right clips of Alex Sarr, especially in this class, I totally get why you would be that way, right? And then there's a growing, I would say, Klingon contingent, probably because some of it's that the Hawks like him, and it's kind of, people are watching him more and more, and I get that too. And the argument that you just kind of made is, makes a lot of sense. Like there's obviously a divide on how good he is, but the stuff that he does well, that everybody kind of agrees on he does well, defend the rim, massive size, passing, all those things, the Hawks could use all of those things. And then there's like the, what do you want out of this pick conversation, whereas it's not just Sarr is the upside pick and Klingon's the safe pick. It's not that easy, because it's just not. Like, I'm actually kind of on your side with Ron Holland. I think Ron Holland might be the actual upside pick in some ways, because he's the wing everybody wants, but the league doesn't seem to agree with people like you and I that are higher on him. Steph Castle, same thing. So I think practically speaking, and the reason I asked that question is because I had Sam Massini on, who earlier this week, and I basically was like, Sam, would it floor you if it was someone other than Klingon, Sarr, or Risa Shea at #1, if they drafted someone else? Because you brought up 2013, Anthony Bennett was a surprise. Like not only was that like a weird pick, it was actually a surprise. Like day of, almost, people were like not seeing that coming. That was a big surprise.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was my first year covering the draft, and we pre-wrote 7 guys for #1 overall,
and not him,
and not him.
Yeah. So that, and look, I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but I think the intel game is probably a little bit better now. There's just more information out there. I would be very surprised if the Hawks were honestly good enough at masking it to where they actually could pull a total surprise by draft day. But so, basically Sam was like, yeah, I'd be surprised if it was not one of those 3 guys. That doesn't mean that they're number 1, 2, or 3 on my board, because honestly, they're not. But I've just come to grips and talked a lot about more of those guys recently, because those seem to be the 3 picks that they're trying to kind of choose between. There's this whole thing about, actually, let's just narrow on Sarr. So you talk about Sarr. Sarr is the guy you would pick. You just said that, right? Have you heard any buzz about like Sarr not wanting to be a center? That's kind of out there, and people ask about that all the time. Like, is he kind of the way he plays, even not even necessarily intel, but there's some of that too. If you watch him play, I think he fashions himself more of a perimeter player on offense in some respects, especially, which could be a good thing. But what do you make of that, especially for like, the Hawks have Jalen Johnson, and not everybody is like totally in love with Jalen Johnson, but the Hawks are. The Hawks love Jalen Johnson. He's their starting power forward. He can play some three, but if you view Alex Sarr as a 4, there's some interesting overlap there, especially if you have to have a center next to those guys. So I've said a lot, but what do you make of like, what is Alex Sarr? Like, other than a guy that we agree is really talented, what does his next like step look like, especially early and then as he transitions to like year 3, year 4?
The first thing I'll say is that just talking to blue chip basketball players, like before they get into college, I've been doing this for a long time. Somehow, thankfully.
That's why I'm asking you.
All the big men say they don't want to play center. Like when Harry Giles was the number 1 guy in the class, I talked to him and he's like, "Oh, I'm not playing center." And of course, Anthony Davis would be the premium example of this. Right. And even Wembanyama was playing power forward to start the season, probably because he wanted to. He was 7'4" barefoot. So I think, playing center in the NBA is kind of like playing offensive line in the NFL. You get hit, you get pushed, you got guys pushing you in the back all the time. It probably sucks, right? Like, It's like, I don't know. Do you ever play pickup, Brad? When I play pickup, I'm like, I don't want to get a rebound. Somebody else, please get the rebound.
Boxing out's not fun. Like having to throw your weight around. That's sort of a topical sidebar. That there was a lot of, I think the smarter people, people that kind of the nerdier people were mentioning Jason Tatum kind of defending centers like throughout the playoffs. It's like something that like guys don't do. Like star forwards do not want to basically defend centers, and he kind of did that, and that's why it was so notable. It was like, wow, this guy's. And granted, it's the NBA playoffs and it's winning time, but still, like guys don't want to do that. To your point,
yeah, it just sucks, and especially when Sarr, he's going to be, what is he? Just turned 19, I think. He seems like he has a body where he can add muscle. Just eyeballing it, like he'll probably get pretty strong, and how his body develops could really like determine what his upside is. Like, you don't want to compare him to Giannis, but obviously that was the big thing with Giannis is his body just blew up. And as he got more skilled, he became unstoppable in part because he could just run over people. Right. And Sarr is not going to be able to run over anyone in the NBA. I would even say he plays a little soft, which is frustrating. And he's one of these guys who's so talented that he just leaves you wanting more. But he's 19. And I mean, like, of course, he's not going to be a finished product yet. And so, like, I love the fit of him next to a Congo. And I think Jalen Johnson's awesome. I've had a lot of hits and misses, Brad, in my published draft boards over the years, but I did have Jalen Johnson number 8 in that class, which was like one of my better hits in recent memory because I had Sharif Cooper number 9 and Jaden Springer number 10, and both of those guys haven't done anything.
So the Hawks went 8 and 9 in that class for you when they drafted Sharif right after, but it didn't work out. But no, hey,
chance, man. Someone give Sharif a chance. But
I agree. No, you were right about Jalen, and actually this is more inside baseball. There's this whole debate that I've been kind of on the side of Hawks people like, can Jalen is basically what position is Jalen Johnson has been a talking point. And my contribution is basically the Hawks have viewed him as a 4, which is what matters the most. What does the team view you as is kind of what you are for the most part. But he can play the 3, and I think he probably will at times. And look, if they drafted Alex Sarr, to your point, I've said this, I think you can play Jalen Johnson, Alex Sarr, and Onyeka Okongwu. That's not unplayable. It's just there's some questions about shooting and offense and all those things.
100%. And I mean, Bogdanovich is basically one of the best shooters in the league. Trey's one of the best shooters in the league. So could that line up? But here's the thing, like, just play the 3 of those bigs at the 4-5 the whole time. You know what I mean? For all 48 minutes. Like, you could give Sarr a stretch at center. And if he doesn't want to, well, too bad, buddy. Like, you're the number 1 pick.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to at some point. And that's one thing.
You're 7-1.
Yeah, I think at some point he might be one. It might be one of those Evan Mobley kind of things where he plays a lot of 4 early in his career, and then year 2, year 3, everyone agrees Evan Mobley's really good. But there's a lot of people that are like, "Hey, Evan Mobley's probably got to be a center at some point, right? Like, what are we doing here?" And I get why he's not. They got Jared Allen, and Jared Allen's really good, and that's probably the guy that I've seen Sarr and also done it myself compared to the most recently is Evan Mobley, right? As that kind of not in a bad way, but the good kind of tweener who can do a lot of different things well, and that combo 4-5.
I love Mobley. So I mean, if he turned out like I would take prospect Mobley over prospect Sarr.
I agree.
Without thinking about it that hard.
Yeah.
Mobley has really not been as good as I was expecting him to be, but he's still pretty damn good. And he unlocks a lot of different, just like play styles, I think, whether he's at the 4 or the 5, and just like his passing's pretty interesting. That hasn't been totally tapped into a lot yet. Anyways, like, I think that's a decent catch-all comparison for Sarr. And really what's interesting about him is, he's just the big man who can switch and still protect the rim. And there's just not a lot of those guys. Jaren Jackson would be another one. The top end of that would be like Anthony Davis or like Giannis. But that's a very hard guy to get. And, you really got to ask yourself, like, do you believe in his shot? Like, do you think that when you get him into the organization that, like, this guy's going to shoot it long term? Now the buzz is like, oh, Donovan Clingan's ripping threes in workouts, and Zach Edey. I just saw Zach Edey hit like 50% of his threes in a workout. Get that out of here. I don't believe those guys can shoot because they played a lot of high-profile minutes and never shot. Sarr shot. He just didn't make a lot of them. What do you make, 25%? He made as many as Ron Holland.
And I think he wants to shoot too. Like, that's the other thing. Like, with Clint, maybe Klingan and Edey want to shoot. I'm not saying they don't. But I do think that if you're drafting Alex Sarr number 1, you kind of have to buy that he can shoot, like, at least a little bit.
Right.
Just with the way he plays, maybe not right away, but like if he's going to be that more perimeter face up, he likes to shoot jump shots. It's very clear that he likes to do that. And if you do that at a decent level, it can be a real weapon for you. But if you keep shooting 28%, to your point, that's not going to be the best.
Well, I mean, so I'm writing the Holland story, and I'm thinking about this now, like. Is the ideal version of Ron Holland someone like Aaron Gordon? Can he get to Aaron? But, part of the thing I'm going to say is that he's a little small for that. He's more like the size of a 3, but he kind of has the game of a 4. But Sarr is like a supersized version of Gordon. I actually think that Sarr can get to an Aaron Gordon shooting level much more than I believe that Holland can. Is that good enough? I mean, it might be good enough if he's just flying all over the place and making plays and dunking on people and running the floor and doing chaos style stuff, opportunistic scoring. Like, if that's kind of a pathway for him, like, he just has to be as good of a shooter as Aaron Gordon. I know that Gordon's game is more distinct, obviously, than just being athletic and strong. But a lot of the reason he's good is because he kind of does, like, Swiss Army knife / garbage man style contributions. And could Sarr just do that playing hard? Obviously, like, I think Sarr doesn't play through contact as well as Gordon does, and that makes a big difference in the NBA. But in terms of Sarr's jump shot, I think he can at least get to Aaron Gordon level, which might be okay. That might be palatable for you picking number 1.
All right, that is all for part 1 with myself and Ricky O'Donnell of SB Nation. Part 2 should be available in this same podcast feed right now, so go ahead and click over to that. Stay tuned. Please subscribe to this podcast, Apple, Spotify, also YouTube, etc. Follow the show on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. I also do some extra work when it comes to the Hawks and the Braves on occasion at patreon.com/BT Rowland, which would appreciate your support there as well. Stay tuned for part 2 and more, and we'll see you all next time.